Uh, The chair calls the Honorable Jonah Wheeler.
Chairman Roy, members of the House Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee. For the record, my name is Representative Jonah O'Ryan Wheeler, and it's always a pleasure to be back in my old committee. I'm here today as the member who introduced the further amendments to Senate Bill 624, and want to testify to say that what we did in amending this piece of legislation, I guess, should begin with the story of Senate Bill 624. I believe that Senator Gannon wasn't able to testify today. I know Senate Judiciary was in session. 624 came to my committee, House Environment and Agriculture, dealing with the synthetic cannabis issue that we have here in our state. And what I mean by that is there are convenience stores, retail establishments that are, because of a loophole that was created by the Farm Bill in 2018, selling THCA and other synthetic cannabis products that are getting people high. Delta 9, Delta 8, you're probably familiar with these products insofar as we have all seen them advertised at convenience stores and others, packaged in a ways like Michael was mentioning towards children, where you've got Sour Patch Kids, Doritos, products that you think are regular junk food, but are in fact synthetic cannabis products that can get you high. And so Senate Bill 624 was introduced to deal with the gap in the law that allows for these establishments to sell those products. It's not particularly legal, but they have a gray area in which they are using to sell these products. And so hearing the merits behind 624 and knowing the dangers behind synthetic cannabis, when we talk about synthetic cannabis, we're not talking about the plant that Michael was so eloquently relaying the benefits of. We're talking about laboratory extracted chemical from the derived from the plant, but nonetheless laboratory extracted chemical that has effects that are far different than THC, which comes from the plant itself. And children are using these products. People as young as 12 years old are able to buy them because there are no age restrictions on who's able to buy these products, and they're marketed in a lot of ways towards children. And so I want the underlying merits of 624 to pass, and that's what I wanted when I first heard this legislation in my committee. But the bill as it was brought to us would have made all CBD medical products in this state illegal. It would have overturned the decriminalization statute that we have in 300 chapters of our RSAs, making cannabis in effect entirely illegal. And it would have added a personal penalty for children who happen to purchase this, meaning that these children would be subject to a misdemeanor, etc. These were unworkable elements of this piece of legislation, not just for the committee, but as we are all aware, having dealt with legislation like this for the entire House. And so what we did on Environment and Agriculture was craft as best we could the amendment which passed on the House floor 2 Thursdays ago to this piece of legislation, which would protect those medical products while also dealing with the synthetic cannabis issue. And the committee worked very closely with the chief of the law enforcement division of the Liquor Commission, Chief Armaganian, and his partner Danielle here, who I'm sure will testify after me, to what they are trying to do here in fixing this gap in the law and making sure that our children are protected. And I had a conversation with one of the members of our committee, is the representative for Michael. And so he wasn't able to come, didn't know that we had a hearing, but did let his representative know his concerns with the piece of legislation. But I hadn't heard those concerns until after our committee vote. But in hearing those concerns, as Michael relayed to you today, that's where this amendment to the piece of legislation was created, that remits a 1 milligram per dose and 10 milligram per container limit on full spectrum CBD products. So there are broad spectrum CBD products derived from hemp that have no THC in them, and there are full spectrum CBD products that contain trace amounts of THC. Now, I'd like to read from I don't want to negate the passionate testimony from before, but I do want to read from a place. I was doing some research before leaving today. That's why I was a few minutes late. And I want to read from Mary Jane's Bakery Company.com. Hemp-derived CBD topicals, and this same sentence also applies to the tinctures as well, but this is about topicals in particular, are formulated to stay legal as hemp-derived products, so the THC concentration remains very low. A typical application, pea to quarter-sized amount, roughly 0.5 to 2 grams or milliliters, depending on the product, usually delivers well under 1 to 2 milligrams of THC, often much less. Even in a high-potency, full-spectrum jar, examples of 1,000 to 4,000 milligrams total CBD, the THC is a tiny fraction because of the 0.3% cap. And that's the federal farm bill cap that's there on the full spectrum products. It would generally require a large portion of the entire container at once to approach the higher THC amounts. So there are products, the industry is clever, a lot of products out there. This amendment, and I would prefer cannabis be legal. You all know that. I testified to a constitutional amendment which allowed for the possession of this product. But I also want to deal with the synthetic cannabis issue and get the best piece of law out that we can. And having dealt with this for the last month, I'm fully of the belief, having worked with liquor, the ATCs, and a whole bunch of other stakeholders, that this 1 to 10 milligram per dose cap is the best text that will come, barring the inexpedient to legislate motion on this piece of legislation. I could go on, but that's, I guess, where I would end. This is an amendment that I have a couple of people who I know are willing to introduce to your committee in the executive session. I know you've got an amendment to the bill that I also support around xylazine as well. And so we'll hear that, and I'm going to testify in support of that later on. But this is, I think, an important carve-out which protects the overwhelming majority of the CBD medical products in our state.
Thank you, Representative. Could you, if you would be so kind, address some of the concerns we heard from the citizen who testified regarding products that he feels will be made illegal? I'm kind of confused about,
Well,
what are we talking about?
He's correct. There are products that contain, like he was saying about Charlotte's Web or some similar products. There are CBD oil tinctures that contain 70 milligrams of THC total. And they won't get you high because the overwhelming amount of CBD, which is, if you think about like sugar or something along those lines, sugar affects your body less when it is encapsulated in fat. When you've got a donut with a bunch of fat on it and you eat it, that sugar is going to hit you less than when you take a pixie stick. Yeah, there you go. Then when you take a pixie stick and you just take a shot of sugar like that, that sugar is going to rush to your system. But I'm not a scientist, so I don't want to start using the words soluble and things like that. But there you go. I'm glad that worked. And so there are products like that would not be, that this legislation would make illegal, that would not make people high. And I do ideally, what I believe should happen, being honest, is that this legislation should be amended, or rather the statute that this legislation will put in place should be amended in the next legislative session, where we come back. Part of what I've understood in looking at these statutes over the course of dealing with this piece of legislation is the hemp statutes in general, because we are relying on federal work that has been done so frivolously, are completely hard to understand, not workable in a lot of ways. So we should come back and make sure that these work for the patients in our state and the enforcement officers who are trying their best to deal with products which we have marked as illegal. And so the thing that he was bringing up is true. There are products like that will be made illegal, but from what I understand, based off of the research that I was able to do, the overwhelming majority of the full spectrum CBD products, and I believe this is why we haven't had opposition from the other marijuana policy advocates here, in this state is because these products overwhelmingly have less than 10 milligrams of THC in them. And that's why I used 10 milligrams as the marker here. And I also just want to mention that in terms of the corner office doesn't want to sign any piece of legislation that legalizes any amount of THC. And so 10 was both the marker that I found that contained and covered the majority of the products that our patients in our state are using, the overwhelming majority, and also the one that I knew that would we be able to make sure the corner office was okay with in terms of their opinion on cannabis. And so it's not perfect in my mind. I agree with where Michael is coming from, but in terms of how we're going to make this sausage work, this is where I think we're at.
So in your opinion, if we were to just limit it to the age and the packaging, that wouldn't be enough to pass the other body. So that's why this is necessary.
In part, yes, but there's also limiting it to the age and the packaging doesn't deal with the products that the bill was introduced to deal with. I mean, it would leave these products out in the market, which is what their concern is.
Representative Scheer, I see you.
And is that concern, and maybe other witnesses will reflect this, but is that concern beyond there's a concern for people using these products even if they're over 21? Am I hearing that correctly? Or I guess a version of what the chair has asked is, why don't we just ban the use of these products, or the sale of these products, or use of these products by people under the age of 21? Doesn't that address everything?
I think what the THCA and these other synthetic cannabis products are both not legal or illegal. And they fall, in many ways, they should fall under, if the legislature has marked cannabis as illegal, as cannabis. And so what the retail stores are doing right now, and I think Liquor will speak more eloquently to this, is the fact that the Farm Bill legalized certain elements of hemp that they are using to now sell intoxicating products at gas stations and retail stores. And so I personally believe that people over the age of 21 should be able to use intoxicating products. But the state has statutes in it saying otherwise, and as do the federal government. And so in terms of the enforcement agency's ability to coherently deal with what the legislature has tried to put in front of it, I'd say that we should put these products under the same sorts of rules that are there for intoxicating products, rather than piecemealing legalization by legalizing these products, or allowing the sale of them rather, for people over the age of 21, and trying to move forward from there.
Representative Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for taking my question. I have two. I feel like we've kind of been talking about this, but is there like strong enough of a reason to take action on this now, considering the federal government is already like reviewing and amending all this stuff? You know, there was a cap put in the big beautiful bill that is now being like revisited to, you know, change what they thought actually went too far. In my opinion, I feel like we're kind of jumping the gun a little bit and should wait and see what happens federally before we're passing something else, especially if you're already suggesting that we would return and amend this again next year. I'm just curious what your thoughts are about that.
Well, I just don't like to rest my laurels on the federal government, especially in the place and moment in time where it's in right now. I mean, we are also a legislature, and we have statutes that aren't properly dealing with this situation right now. And so I think it's incumbent on us to make our statutes as proper as they can, and I think this legislation moves us forward on that. I do believe that this is a longer term project, in that it's not going to take one session to make the statutes work correctly. But the federal government right now, I think those bills in a lot of ways are too big and too beautiful. You know, they really are just piecemeal work done by lobbyists in a lot of ways, and it's not that people with expertise are putting forward the best piece of product like we are, I think, here. They have industries that say we need this text. It gets into the massive bill and then passed through reconciliation and all these other things. So I don't like to rely on that process, and I'm not as confident as some of others who I know we've talked to that some of these changes which we're looking at might happen in the federal government, although I hope they do.
Follow up.
Thank you. The second question, I don't know if you'll know this because I don't know if it went to your committee first or not, but there was SB 461 that amended the definition of hemp already. Do you know how that plays into this at all, or does it?
So it's similar, but it's a different thing, and I think that liquor will be able to speak more eloquently to that. I think that came to your committee and not ours. There was some shenanigans, as I know you know, Mr. Chairman, with the introductions of these bills, the assignment of the bills of which committees they went to and other things. But
No comment.
Seeing that the per container limit that would actually take effect in November, assuming that this law actually takes effect in November, is 0.4, and that I think this bill it's 10 milligrams, correct?
my amendment has a
10
exemption for 10 milligrams per container
Okay.
that applies to anything that's not drinkable, smokable, or edible.
So given the fact that this bill would take effect in January and the federal law may take effect in November, are we, I guess from the standpoint of people who are actually trying to run a business and do the right thing, how are they supposed to do that? If they have it if we have it set at one level in the state and the federal government has it set at a different level, and these changes are basically coming almost at the same time.
It's a good question. If this committee determines that this piece of legislation is more apt to be an expedient to legislate, then so be it. But I think that what we have here is a piece of product that's pretty clear to understand, and resting on the laurels of the federal government is just not what I think we should do.
Do we know what's coming from the federal
We
government?
don't. That's
I mean, because the representative said November. What's coming in November?
the executive order was signed. That's what we know.
What does that
And
do?
That reschedules cannabis to Schedule 3 from 1, and it also I think part of what the interpretation people are looking at right now is there are around 250 some odd products. I don't want to speak out of turn here, but there are some 250 CBD medical products that people are saying that executive order made now legal. And so
Would that impact the things that are in your amendment? Or we don't know.
This is what I'm saying in terms of I really don't want to rely on the federal government.
Yeah.
It's so piecemeal. It's so confusing.
Has it been left up to the DEA or the FDA?
I don't know the answer to that
Yeah,
question.
so, okay. All right, good. Thank you. Oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry. Representative Saubon Deschanel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. You mentioned a few weeks ago that, you mentioned that we voted on this bill, the 624 on the House Fourth Amendment. Okay, thank you. Just want to clarify.
Yep. On the consent calendar, but yes.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
how. Okay.
If I just may add one last final thing, Mr. Chairman. I wholeheartedly agree with Michael in terms of, I think that this bill is ideally, but we've got, I think, a good amendment on xylazine here on this vehicle. And if this is a vehicle moving forward, this is the text that should move forward with it on hemp.
Thank you. We'll discuss that during executive. Your bill, I believe, your amendment will be introduced by a member of the committee when we get to the executive session. The chair calls